Welcome to Hard Tech Manufacturing with Dr. Dickson. This show features cutting-edge manufacturing technologies of breakthrough products that require immense imagination and innovation. We'll cover challenges associated with design, engineering, sourcing, logistics, marketing, and sales. We'll also explore manufacturing operations and supply chain bottlenecks and the practical solutions to these challenges. And now from Atlanta, here is your host, Dr. Dickson Wambua.
Yeah, so today I'm joined by a young man from Chicago, Luca Uransel. And Lucas is an extraordinary person. Within a few years, he has risen through the ranks of corporate and become the chief growth officer of an exciting company called Cloudsyte. And Cloudsyte is working in the cross section of manufacturing and supply chain. So it is going to be very interesting to hear, his personal story and how he has been able to manage to rise that fast. But not just that, but also what is going on in supply chain and manufacturing. So I'm very excited to be speaking with you today, and thank you very much for joining the show. So welcome, Lucas, and introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Lucas Uransel, and thanks for having me on, Dr. Dickson. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm the Chief Growth Officer at Cloudsyte, and I'm excited to talk about manufacturing and supply chain today. So
tell us about your personal story. How did you get started to rise that fast, and in an industry that we know very well that is extremely competitive?
Yeah, I think I've always been really obsessed with how technology can impact the day-to-day of operations. And prior to Cloudsyte, I had an attempt to actually create a distribution company and can join the software with that. And when I met the guys over at Cloudsyte, I realized that we were on a very similar mission, and they were way ahead. And so after just forming a friendship first, I think what I discovered was that they had a system that was capable of doing a lot more, a lot quicker. And fortunately, I was able to combine the efforts that I had in what I was trying to accomplish with theirs. And that led to what I consider to be a glorious friendship and partnership that has now blossomed into a wonderful software and a great startup.
So it sounds to me like you're not just in a managerial position, but it looks like being entrepreneurial in that position appears to be an important aspect to growth and success. Is that the case?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's the best part about it. You're not doing, anyone who works on a startup will tell you, you're not doing just one thing. You're doing 100 different things at 100 miles per hour, 100 times a day. So it's probably the more fun part is you get to remain, you get to keep the entrepreneurial spirit of trying to start your own software, your own startup. And then with the combination and the combined efforts that I get from the two co-founders at Cloudsyte, it allows me to keep that entrepreneurial spirit and use that to drive decisions and everything like that, and continue to innovate in a space where innovation is not only needed, but it's mandatory nowadays. So,
yeah, that's very interesting. So we know that supply chain and manufacturing has just become like a household word now. So it looks like there's a lot of mayhem in the world, people trying to get goods to customers, but not being able to do so because of a lot of different problems. So what do you think is really the issue with supply chain? Does it look broken to you, and what can you attribute that to?
Yeah, it's definitely broken. I can agree with that. And I think the biggest issue is probably the collaboration between everyone within the supply chain, but specifically between the suppliers and the manufacturers. We have so much manufacturing done overseas that when you're communicating just through emails or stuff like that, you can lose a lot of information. You can lose a lot of critical financial information. Things become a mess. Okay, and when you lose information across the chain, it creates problems. It creates bottlenecks, and ultimately, I believe that it's a very big reason why there's potentially not going to be toys on the shelf for Christmas, coming up, and it creates these types of issues that ultimately I think the only way to fix is through technology and systems and new ways to collaborate with people that haven't really been attempted before.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you raise collaboration as an issue which is a centerpiece in supply chain and manufacturing. A lot of people really don't understand everything that happens in supply chain. So I think some of us would benefit from you trying to unpack for us what it takes to manufacture something as simple as a microphone in this case. Where does that start and how does it get to the customer?
Oh, that's a lot to unpack. Yeah, it's just because so much goes into what this microphone is, to what this iPhone is. CEO of Cloudsyte and founder of Cloudsyte, co-founder of Cloudsyte, Kennedy always uses the iPhone as an example because this iPhone is compiled of 500 parts, something crazy like that, and they're all coming from different places. So the piece for the camera right here. That's coming from one place, and the case is coming from another place, and the screen is coming from another place. And you're manufacturing these things in very high volume. So in order to communicate with how many different suppliers, like let's call it 100 different suppliers, you have one person managing that through emails for the production of X phones. And that's a lot, that's a lot to handle. And so that's where I think, it creates issues, because if there's one problem with one phone, now you got to search through an absolute jumble of mess through things and have people manage that. And it's just not in my opinion, it's just not a proper way to manage your supply chain.
Yeah, so I was reading somewhere, just trying to go through some information as far as manufacturing and supply chain is concerned. And I saw the stages that a product goes through. So, for example, the first team to really work on a product is the design team. And then from the design team, there's a marketing team that figures out whether this thing can be sold. And then there's a supply chain team that goes out and looks for suppliers. And then there's a sourcing team that places the purchase order. And there's the actual manufacturing and shipping from the manufacturer to the customer, maybe outside whichever country that is being produced. So how do all these teams communicate to make sure that a product is successfully launched?
Yeah, I think that's what I'm reverting back to saying over and over again. Is unfortunately, I think in a lot of ways people are using outdated systems or outdated methods. So, for example, I refer to the emails, but also some of your older, more established ERP systems still put you through traditional email messaging and whatnot. And, we were just on a call with a supplier over in Asia who discussed that they were even communicating with some of their customers through WhatsApp, and I just, I don't know, when talking about financials, when talking about these important pieces that go into these manufactured products, I think that's a very dangerous way to communicate. And also, you just don't know where the data is going. You can't use the data to create analytics and other stuff like that to drive business decisions. And so, yeah, these more traditional methods is how they're keeping it together. And so now there's a bunch of new players, including Cloudsyte, that are trying to reinvent supply chain in terms of, how do we collaborate? And what's the best way we're going to do this? And so creating methods to change what is otherwise considered a supply chain norm is a big driving factor for why my startup is doing the things that it needs to do.
So what is the main problems that Cloudsyte, or pain points that Cloudsyte is trying to solve?
See, that's a tough question. You're putting me on the spot here because there's so many, right? But I would say, of course, the first issue that we touched on is the collaboration. But let's try talking about something different. Let's try talking about the unification of different softwares together into one production hub. Very frequently with the industries that we work in, they'll have segregated softwares. They won't be under the same hub. And so you have a supply chain team acting with the supply chain team. You have your product development team acting with your product development team. And then you have the overall management team that doesn't necessarily have an overarching way to see where the spend is coming from the supply chain and how that's impacting the product development teams. So what Cloudsyte really did was unify those three things. as well as kept different ways to manage documents and all the other mandatory things that go in with supply chain and manufacturing. We cover that entire spectrum through the supply chain into production. So by basically combining those efforts, what you're doing is we refer to it as a production hub. You're using this production hub to essentially just create efficiency and to avoid miscommunication and ultimately avoid problems. So
you touched on several different very important things that have come up in conversations that I've had with other people, and that is collaboration and visibility of the business, as well as communication between distributed teams. So it seems to me what you're saying is that companies that are manufacturing goods, for example, here in the US, and they are probably outsourcing that manufacturing to a contract manufacturer outside the country, they have a problem communicating between themselves inside the companies and outside the companies with their contracted manufacturers. Is that the case? And how does Cloudsyte help?
Yeah, it is the case, 100%. I think you nailed that on the head. And, I think the best method that Cloudsyte has to help is, one, we have an internal messaging system where you're able to communicate with your team, but, you're also allowed to streamline the conversation through a supplier portal. So by simply adding all of your suppliers to the system at no cost, okay, that's a very frequent question. How much is it going to cost if you're adding suppliers to the system? It costs nothing. You give them a very easy login for them to give you updates. So your supplier is able to update you on production. They're able to update you on approvals for purchase orders and stuff like that without having to get in that WhatsApp, without having to get in the emails, without having to search and search and search. So what we did is created that two-way system for direct collaboration. And so, I would say that's the most efficient way to solve these collaboration problems is through a supplier portal, which is a foundation that Cloudsyte was built off.
Hard Tech Manufacturing with Dr. Dickson is brought to you by Cloudsyte. Cloudsyte enables importers and their suppliers to work collaboratively. Cloudsyte tracks every single purchase order to provide total visibility and gathers all your data on a single database to run real-time analytics. If you're looking for a revolutionary solution with PLM, engineering change orders, PO management, incident management, shipping documents, inventory management, analytics, and more, head to cloudsyte.com. That's CLOUDSYTE.com to start for free.
Yeah. So another important thing that you raise here is that of suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
And tell me, what are the technicalities or difficulties or challenges that companies have trying to identify reliable suppliers, especially outsourced suppliers in other countries?
Yeah. There's an assortment, but I would say other than the collaboration, it's also keeping track of when those products are coming back. If your purchase orders have been approved, what's happening with that product that you're using. Because that supplier could be a contract manufacturer, as they could just be, giving, they could just be supplying, of course, which you need them to kind of stay on top of things in order to give people the correct lead times, in order to make sure that marketing campaign launches at the right moment, in order to give you the correct numbers for your salespeople so that they know that they're selling the right products, whatever it may be. And so it's that streamlined conversation with that first mile that really impacts the rest of what you do with your products. And if that's off, it's going to throw everything else off kilts. And I guess the best way to put it is we heard a story about, a marketing campaign that ended up launching too soon because of when their product delayed and they weren't able to get the information in time from their suppliers. So this launched literally millions of dollars in issues for this company. And so what we try to do is help people avoid that situation by making sure that first mile runs seamless.
Yeah, so really hard money lost because of lack of collaboration and visibility in the business. So I know there are several companies that might be listening to this. They're startups. They have no idea how to choose suppliers, out in Asia or wherever else they might be looking for suppliers. So what kind of advice or where do you think they really can start for looking for those suppliers that are credible?
Well, lucky for them, there is a supplier catalog within Cloudsyte. And so they'll be able to, take a look at different suppliers in the system and see what they have to offer. And maybe that's the direct way for them to talk to a new supplier. I think that's the best way. And then also figuring out like what is going to be, easiest for you to handle. If you need to have overseas like manufacturing and whatnot, you might want to consider figuring out whether it's Cloudsyte or not Cloudsyte, finding someone who has some type of streamlined collaboration for those people. And like I said, that's where the supplier portal really comes in, because you're able to communicate with people all over the world without having to actually, in my opinion, communicate. So all the information is just free flowing. And you're able to centralize that data in one place and genuinely use it. I think one thing for these startups that you're referring to that can be a bit of a challenge is to actually have data-driven results from the data. You don't get that from sending your purchase orders through emails. You get that by, having, a system like ours create spend analytics and incident analytics to figure out what's actually going on in your supply chain and what you're actually doing. So I think that's the biggest thing for small companies is using the tools that are readily available to make sure that you're making the right decisions. And Cloudsyte offers that.
Yeah, so if you look at what's happening in supply chain and manufacturing, and I know you've spoken with a lot of founders and a lot of people that are working in this industry, what do you think are the top 3 challenges that they are facing, especially now that COVID has really thrown a wrench in the works?
That's a really good question. That is because there's so many. I would say right now, anyone watching the news knows that there's not trucks moving products. I think that's like a really big issue happening right now is making sure that, things actually hit the shelves. I think that's number 1 priority right now is figuring out those needs because, people's kids need to have toys for Christmas and stuff like that. It's a major problem. But other than that, I would say it's, 1, finding the right manufacturer for your product. I think oftentimes people they have trouble finding a manufacturer and it may be rushed. And there's not a way to measure quality. There's not a way to track the product life cycle for everything they're doing, which overall is just terrible for your products. If there's no way to actually manage quality and manage life cycle. And the other way is just, it's what are you doing with your code? Is your time taking a purchase order template and putting it into a Google Doc or using QuickBooks to write purchase orders and you're dealing with that and you're sending, 60 emails a day and you don't even have a way to figure out whether or not they're even getting that,
Yeah.
So figure out a way to streamline that conversation and to find a way to automate those purchase orders and make that part a little bit easier. So if you have a startup, you're able to focus on a lot of the other things that are really important, which is really marketing and selling your product. So, you can make money and feed your kids.
Yeah, that's right. But and again, you bring up an important point of time, because that is one thing that we can never buy. And that is one thing, especially with manufacturers, that they have to be very careful with. So speaking with founders in several companies the last few months, I find several areas that they commonly mention that they struggle with. Things like bills of materials, ways to do purchase orders, and not just purchase order writing, but being able to manage those purchase orders, being able to manage production and know exactly when something has already been produced, whether it is delayed for whatever reason, whether something is shipped on, and when it is going to get to the warehouse. The other thing I hear a lot about is people using these emails to exchange information. And what happens is that once you exchange any information through an email, you're basically putting it in a silo because there's no way to harvest that data. So a lot of companies talking about not being able to visualize the data because it's all locked up in emails, which eventually obviously leads to lack of visibility within the business. And these days, we know that having that data is really important. So I don't know what kind of conversations you've had with companies recently as far as data analytics is concerned. So if you can just tell us a little bit about the importance of crunching data and using that for decision making, I think that would help some people.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I think that's very important always is having analytics. And so I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier with, how are you monitoring your spend? Where is your money going, and what is the outcome of how you spend that money? And so if you say don't have the, if people aren't actually executing properly on how you're spending your money, do you really have a way to look back in your emails of 500 emails searching for parts and whatnot to figure that out? I guess that's the question you have to ask yourself, because I don't know how people would have time for that personally while managing all the other aspects of the business. And then, overseas, whatever it may be with contract manufacturers, there's a lot of things that can halt production. I think everyone hears, whether or not it's a horror story or something unlucky, or power outages in places like China where a lot of contract manufacturing is occurring, a lot of things can halt the production of your products. And how are you tracking that? What Cloudsyte offers in terms of trying to solve that problem is the ability to have very easy to write incidents that the supplier can put in with a level of severity, low, high, medium, whatever it may be. It could be for raw material shortages. It could be injury in the factory, whatever may happen. All they have to do is simply log in and let you know through that, and you immediately see it. You can now immediately plan for the worst situation. God forbid it happens, but it does. So, you don't even have to get on the phone with those people. You don't have to stay up till 3 a.m. talking to your contract manufacturer in China.
Yeah.
You have to just simply check your phone, check your computer, and you will be able to now inform your team about these situations happening overseas. And at that point, you have now full control over what's happening in your production. You have full control what's happening in your supply chain. And you're sitting at home or you're sitting in the office, and most people don't have that.
Yeah, so you mentioned QuickBooks and several other software pieces that companies are using. Is it possible that you can integrate a Cloudsyte, you can integrate with these systems?
100%. Yeah, to give you the accounting effect, we have an integration in with QuickBooks, and we'll have an integration in with NetSuite very soon, and other ERP systems. So we can augment that system and give you that full supply chain and product development suite. If you didn't want to use Cloudsyte as a more modern version of an ERP system, I think it's honestly great to be able to integrate in with the ERP systems. But what really, in my opinion, is Cloudsyte's benefit is the fact that, in my opinion, you don't need an ERP system, because we're offering a more modern system for you to handle all of these things. So with a simple accounting integration that goes in with something like QuickBooks, you now have full access to an ERP system without spending $200,000, without spending $1 million, whatever it may be on these expensive systems that ultimately you might not actually be using. I hear stories all the time. I had a great conversation with a company out here in Chicago, actually, who discussed how much it costs to install their ERP system and implement it with a consultant. And I think everyone listening right now who's gone through this knows the pain and the stress that goes in with implementation consultants and onboarding a new system. And they realized that after all of that entire process, it wasn't for them. So now they have a $250,000 system that hypothetically is keeping dust on the shelves, and they're back to managing their product through email and through QuickBooks, which costs how much money, Dickson? Like, not very much. So they just took $250,000 and put it in a dumpster fire. And I don't want people to do that. And the co-founders of Cloudsyte built this product so people don't have to do that. And so very passionate about ERP systems, as you can tell, but I don't want people to waste money, because coming from a startup, what it feels like to hustle and do it on very small budgets and whatever it may be, and to toss $100,000, $50,000, even $10,000 out on something that doesn't work is foolish. Yeah.
So, who is your ideal customer?
That's a great question. I think there's so many people that we can work with, and I love the aerospace field. I love consumer electronics. Anyone who's building products like this, big or small, small or big is an airplane, right? And medical devices, we work with some medical device companies that are genuinely changing the world with some of their innovation. And it's always happy to work. I'm happy to work with those people because, their product is actually doing something to improve the general well-being of people's livelihood. And so, we range from anywhere from robotics, aerospace, medical devices, consumer electronics, consumer goods. Just basically think of anything that's high volume products that are being manufactured.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Lucas. Really appreciate your time here and, shedding some light as far as supply chain and manufacturing is concerned. I'm wondering if you have any parting shots.
No, I appreciate you having me on. I'm a big fan. I think you definitely bring up a lot of good points, and it's really nice to have a conversation with another knowledgeable supply chainer. Let's call that. Yeah.
And how can people get to register or to go on Cloudsyte? How can they get to you?
Yeah,
on the website or something.
Yep. Reach out to my LinkedIn and shoot me a message. I'm always there, and feel free to visit the Cloudsyte website. That's Cloudsyte CLOUDSYTE. Feel free to visit the site and schedule a demo, and I'll give you a look at everything.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Hard Tech Manufacturing with Dr. Dickson is brought to you by Cloudsyte. Cloudsyte enables importers and their suppliers to work collaboratively. Cloudsyte tracks every single purchase order to provide total visibility and gathers all your data on a single database to run real-time analytics. If you're looking for a revolutionary solution with PLM, engineering change orders, PO management, incident management, shipping documents, inventory management, analytics, and more, head to cloudsyte.com. That's CLOUDSYTE.com to start for free.